Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive. Today, we have a new guest here. I start each episode with having my guests introduce themselves. So your name and how you identify and whatever that means to you.
My name is Gabriela Revilla Lugo, the Americanized, I guess, Gabby Lugo, if you need that. I am a Nicaraguan-American person. And I guess I should say, now I feel like everyone should say their pronouns. I'm she, ella, hers.
Where are you from? And like the short answer, the long answer, like whatever that means to you.
This is my favorite question because it's like you ask, any of my friends in college, they're like, I'm from Ohio. And like my answer is never that simple, right? So I was born in Nicaragua, during a revolution, and we came to the United States the first time undocumented when I was, maybe 4 years old. Lived in Texas. If you would have asked me at the time, I would have been like, oh, I'm from Texas. Obviously, it was not, but really loved living there. There was like a big Latino culture there. And then after the war, we went back to Nicaragua. And now I had to adjust to being like, I thought of myself as American, and had to sort of like come back to Nicaragua to a culture that was at the culture where I started, but not the one I was living, and relearn sort of what that meant to me. So lived in Nicaragua for a while, came back to school, then to Virginia. So I'm from Nicaragua. I was born in Nicaragua, but I spent a lot of formative years in Texas and in Virginia.
Can you sort of talk us through like why your parents chose to go to Texas? Are there a lot of Nicaraguans there?
Yeah, so at the time, Somoza had just fallen. For people who don't know Nicaraguan history, so he was like sort of a fascist right-wing dictator. And when he fell, a lot of people left and they went to Texas, to Miami. And at the time, Reagan actually gave a lot of us temporary protected status. And so there were a lot of Nicaraguans in Texas, in Miami. And those were like the main places that we went and where, we could find jobs and find like a community.
I always like to know about people's parents and like grandparents. So like, what is like your family history? Like,
oh my gosh.
What are your parents like?
So my parents are such oddballs. So my mom was the daughter of this like wealthy banker, and she left all of that because she fell in love with like a guy from the wrong side of the tracks, which was like this like mestizo, man who, I don't even think she knew his last name. And they sort of fell in love, which was like a bad rich girl thing to do. And they went and started teaching people how to read and write. They had this like very hippie sort of like vibe about them. And when he found out that she was pregnant, he left her like in the middle of nowhere in the mountains in Nicaragua. And so she sort of like had to come back to her family and eat a little bit of humble pie. And at first they wouldn't take her back. So like I spent my first few years of life in a garage with my mom. Like we lived in a garage. And then eventually sort of her family came around, took her back in. But she never lost this like revolutionary like streak about her. And she's always been this very like tough person. I mean, she like when things were not good in Nicaragua and people were trying to kill her like from the political party that she had left, which were the Sandinistas who were assuming power at the time, she like, took us across the border, like crossed several countries. I mean, she was like a tough broad with this very conservative family. So she was always sort of like a black sheep in that way. And then when she married my stepdad, who was like also very rebellious, like the black sheep of his family, they produce very, very liberal children who don't sort of fit in with the rest of the team, I would say, even though they're very loving family. Like clearly, like my sister's trans, My brother is, sort of a scientist, atheist, and my other brother is, not really somebody who follows conventions. So we really became the sort of like black sheep outlaw part of the family. I love it though.
And can you sort of speak to like those formative years in Texas? Like, what was your household like? Like, what did you all get up to?
Nicaraguans tend to be really like conservative, but also people who like very lovingly, I think, try to assimilate to their surroundings, which was like never me, right? Like I peroxided my hair because I wanted it to be like orange and loud and, wanted to be this sort of like, I didn't really fit in, but my family was so, we lived in a tiny little apartment, like a duplex apartment with my grandparents, my two grandparents, my uncle, which was my mom's little brother. And then we had like a bunch of other people come in and out of that. So like I shared a room with my mom, and my grandmother was a seamstress, and she had a really great sense of humor. Like she was really funny. She once told me that that I was adopted, so I would stop asking questions about something. And, she thought it was hilarious. And I like was maybe 5 and packed up like my dolls and tried to run away. But she had this like wonderful sense of humor. She was really funny. She has dementia now, actually, or the beginning stages of dementia. She has Alzheimer's, and she always jokes, and she's like, thank God I'm not going to remember this tomorrow, like this time. So she's really, really funny. And they were always really warm, we did not have a lot of money in Texas. My mom worked 3 jobs. She worked at the 7-Eleven and, at the bookstore. She always, we had a lot of work that was really instilled in us. So we didn't have a lot, but it was really nice and warm. I look fondly on that time,
And how old were you when you all moved back to Nicaragua?
I was maybe 10, and I didn't really speak any Spanish anymore. I mean, ahora sí hablo español, but it was so instilled in me that like we had to assimilate to life in Texas, and I had to become sort of Texan, that I lost a lot of the Nicaraguan, and so when I went back to Nicaragua, I was like the Southern, like, kid who thought she was white. And, it was really tough to get acclimated, to learn to speak Spanish again, to feel like I fit in, because in Texas we were all poor, and like I understood that, and we were like working class, and that made sense to me. And then we went back to Nicaragua, and suddenly like my mom's family had money. We still did not have money. We still lived like with my grandparents, and then went to live in like a small apartment, the two of us. And so things that my friends could do, my friends had like drivers and maids and cooks and like all of these things. And, I sort of felt like, God, once again, like I don't fit in this space, and always sort of tried to make the best of it. But those were tough years for sure.
And was that always part of the plan for your family to like move to Texas and then come back? Like, what was the motivation to go back?
No, it really wasn't. I mean, I think my mom thought like, well, we're here now, we'll just stay. But then I think like Nicaraguans are so all about family that ultimately for her, it was like, well, if everybody's going back. And, Doña Violeta, who was this woman who won the presidency in Nicaragua after the Sandinistas fell, that you didn't think you were going to get a history lesson today.
Hey, I'm a typical Mexican. I don't know anything about Central America, so this helps.
She was the first president after the war, basically. And so after the Sandinistas sort of took over, became like these very bad dudes, Violeta won. And so all of these families felt like they could come back. And so because my family went back, my mom was like, I don't want to be alone, here. And so she went back, and it just never quite fit her. I think now that she was like speaking her mind and like got a qualification, and so it was tough for her. She always wanted to come back to the States.
And I'm always curious about people during their high school years. So I always frame this question, and for this time is, who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how did people see you?
I think I was incredibly insecure. I was battling a lot of depression. I'd had like a sexual assault incident that happened in Nicaragua. And by the time I got to high school, which I moved here for high school, I moved to Virginia for high school. I think I was like excited about the idea of like reinventing myself and pretending like none of that happened. Like here I'm going to be, a good American girl. I'm going to assimilate again, and I'm going to, sort of like reclaim what I had in Texas. And it's just incredibly insecure. Like sometimes I want to go back in time and just like hug that person, And then I guess who was I pretending to be? I think I was pretending to be an exceptional like student, somebody who like was everybody's friend and who got along sort of with everybody. And then I think people saw me as somebody who like had it together, like I wasn't the most popular kid in school, but I wasn't like that I didn't have any friends. I think people probably saw me as very shallow at the time, I think.
And what was the motivation to move to Virginia?
My mom had just married my stepdad. And after the experiences I had had with her former boyfriends, I was not excited about her getting married and like getting to know this person. I mean, cut to now, my stepdad is my dad. He's my best friend. I forget that we're not blood related. And actually, anytime I go to the doctor and I have to like talk about histories, I'm like, what's in my dad's like family history? And then I have to be like, oh, right, we're not blood related. I forget. So they got married, and I think he very wisely was like, this is not a good environment for Gabby. Like, I was growing up in Nicaragua at the time. I know it's not like that now, but at the time, people were drinking at age 13, 14. Like I was going to the bar, when I was like 12. I mean, I remember getting into a fight with my mom because my curfew was midnight when I was 12 years old. Like, that's crazy, right? And I think like my mom just didn't have control. And I think he very wisely was like, we just need to reset as a family, and we need like a chance to be a family sort of away from all of this.
I interview a lot of Latinx folk, obviously, and for them, their journey of claiming a Latinx identity is complicated.
Yeah.
So you sort of touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious of like, what does it even do to like a kid to like move to Texas, grow up there a little bit, try to assimilate and like see yourself as like an American, and then move back to Nicaragua, be very clearly seen as like an American, other, not from here.
Yeah.
And then moving to Virginia where it's like, now you have to like reset again.
It was so hard, because I just never felt like of the place that I was. I just always felt like an outsider. And I remember like, for example, I remember in Texas being a kid and like ironing my hair, like on the ironing board, to like have it be straight. I remember like bleaching my arm hair. I just like so badly wanted to fit in. Like if somebody called me Gabriela, like I would cringe, like I would go to school early the first day of school every time and make sure that the teachers called me Gabby. Like I needed it to be sort of American, and I just like really wanted to fit in. And I think part of that is like I didn't have a dad, and like I just wanted to be like everybody else. And it was tough, in Nicaragua, I was too American, but also brown. And like a lot of my family are, have straight hair and very light skin. Some of them have blue eyes, like very much like Spaniard influenced looking people. Like a lot of my cousins are very white. And I just like, I looked like the poor Nicaraguan people living in the society that I didn't fit in, like sort of peripherally. And then I came to Texas, and I was this like poor Latina who like really wanted to fit in with white society. So you really struggle with this, like, I want to be Latina, I want to tell my story, but I also want to hang out with Jenny, who's like, you know, hanging out with these other people who all fit in, and like, why can't I just be like them?
I want to get into like after high school. Like, did you have a plan? Did you know okay, great.
I had a plan. I was like, after high school, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a good immigrant job. Like, I'm going to be a lawyer, and like, that is acceptable. And like, that's what my parents want. Like, they don't believe in the arts. Like, they didn't get it. As a matter of fact, my parents were, my mom would kill me for saying this, but she was sending me like assistant jobs up until like 2 years ago. And I had like already bought my house and like had a production company, and she was still sending me like, hey, you can go be an assistant at Paramount. I was like, no, I have a real job. She's like, I don't know about that. You don't really go anywhere. But anyway, I forgot your question. Oh yeah. So my plan was to be a lawyer. And then one of my teachers was like, you know, law school is really hard, and it's really tough, and you might want to think about doing something fun before you commit to that. And I was like, fun? I don't know what that is. If it's not productive, like, I don't want to do it. But, you know, I did need some money, and so I went to work at a music venue, and my entire life like changed because the second day I was there, my boss, who was an assistant, had a heart attack, and I got promoted like immediately to be an assistant to this talent booker in Virginia that had like every act that came through DC like came to our venue. So like Aerosmith, Beyonce, the Backstreet Boys, like, you know, Metallica, like anybody who was doing a tour like came through our venues, and I learned how to produce music concerts, and I never wanted to go back. So after that, that was my, between my junior and my senior year in college, I wrote to my professors and I was like, so I got offered a full-time job here. I'm going to take like only the classes I have to take to graduate, and I want to do like distance learning as much as I can. And they said, okay. So I would drive to my college in JMU, which was James Madison University in Virginia, which was 2 hours away from my job every day, and do my job because I loved it so much.
You have like this like adult, like really cool job out of college. You know, you do the credits you need to do. Like, can you sort of talk us through like where that led you?
Yeah, it was sort of sucked, right? Because it was like the year that my friends were all like having fun in college, and I just was like out of that, you know, like I couldn't be a part of it. I had to get up early and go to school. So like I couldn't party with everybody, or I had to get up early and go to work. So that was kind of hard, and but I had this amazing job, so like I didn't care about that. And that's when I really like started writing, because I had all of these like amazing experiences. Like I got to go on the road with the Warped Tour and like all of these other like great bands, and I had this great job. And so I really started writing and like keeping a journal. I'd always kept a journal, but like now was like really sort of chronicling like what I was going through. Mm-hmm. And I remember really wanting to do it, and like wanting to write more and like put all of this in writing. And my teachers in school were like, that's a really like impossible job. It's not a real job. You should just, you know, keep on this path that you're on. And I think like people tell you that enough and you sort of believe them, like even the ones that were like, oh, this stuff that you've written is great, but it's like not realistic. So you should just move on with your life. And so I did like, I think what I thought I was supposed to do. I married a music agent like right out of college, and, you know, went to live in New York. And, you know, sort of, it was really tough because I had no business being married at like 22 years old. Like, who does that? And I so badly, I guess, wanted to fit in with my Nicaraguan friends who were like getting married at that age. And like, it was like, very normal. So I made a lot of mistakes. And in New York, I had a hard time finding a job. And then eventually through connections I had made in Virginia in the music venue, I got a job with Martin Short. And that really impacted me a lot because he had a show on Broadway. And every night, 8 shows a week. So we did 8 shows a week for a year. And my job was to book all of the Jiminy Glick guests, which were like his fake interviews, you know? But somebody had to like write that up for him. And so that was like my first writing job. So I got to like write these like research things essentially on like who was Paris Hilton, who was, you know, people that like Martin Short was like, I don't even know who these people are, and sort of prep his interview. And I got to like sort of see him craft comedy, you know, and really like, how do you make fun of Jerry Seinfeld? How do you make fun of Conan O'Brien? Like, how does it, and watching him sort of take my work and craft it into something incredible was like a front row seat into writing comedy. And it really made me think like, oh wow, people do this for a living. And it is something that I can do, you know? And so I had this like wonderful job that I loved doing, and then had to come home to this like marriage that was very dysfunctional.
It sounds like you got your introduction. You knew like this is something you wanted to do. Like, what did you do then to get to the point where you're like, oh, this is something I'm going to pursue like as a career from now on?
So it sort of took a few more steps, you know, and this is one thing that, you know, there was like a very prominent Latina showrunner who was on Twitter the other day who I love so much, but was like, I'm trying to find like Latinos that are upper level or like mid-level writers. And it, you know, it's so frustrating to me, those questions, because it's like, you know, I have 15 years of experience in production. I've worked on Broadway. I've worked music. I've written professionally. I've had screenplays optioned, and yet I'm considered like a lower level writer because I've only written, you know, on one show on TV. So, you know, that's frustrating because it took me a while still to get there, and not for lack of trying. You know, I think that we forget the moment that we're in now has like so many more doors are being open. But at the time, 2007, 2008, like my show ended with Marty, and getting a writing job was like impossible. You know, I mean, the writer strike happened then, and so I didn't have a lot of options when the show ended, and MTV offered me a job as an executive. And I was like, well, I mean, it pays money and I'll try that, and I can always write for myself, right? Is sort of like what I thought. I need to like put food on the table and pay off my college debts and all of that. So I went to work at MTV. I made really great friends. I'd never met, I know this sounds so crazy, but I'd never met Puerto Ricans before. And I remember I went to work at MTV Tres. Like, I worked at MTV, but part of my job was to be an executive for MTV Tres, which was like the LatinX channel at the time, before we knew the word Latinx. And I came in and I like gave this whole speech to this like conference room about how excited I was to like be there and work with them and blah, blah, blah in Spanish. And not one person knew how to speak Spanish. And they were like, could you say that again, like in English? And I was like, but you all look like me. And you know, what? But there I got like an education that like other Latino people don't have to speak Spanish. And they're like just as, if not more Latina than I am, you know? And that was an education. And like, we were trying to find like why the channel wasn't speaking to a lot of people. And I think it's because we were trying to be a Latin American channel in a Latinx world. And like, that just wasn't working. So I loved my time there, but then still I thought like I was going to get to write. And at the time MTV was like just doing reality. So they weren't interested in I would be like every day, like, oh, look here, I put this pitch together about this like vampire show. And they'd be like, that's nice. Can you go find Snooki? You know, so it just like it was very frustrating, and it just didn't work out. And finally, you know, the writer strike happened, and I got offered a job in daytime talk working for Wendy Williams. So, you know, you get to like write up some segments, but mostly like they have producers that do that. And, you know, I got to work with Wendy Williams, which was interesting, but I got further, like with every promotion, I got like further and further away from writing. And finally, like I was so unhappy that I just decided to like blow up my life. I got a divorce, I left my job, and then just had to like figure out what to do. You know, I had no money. And this is actually how I got into making movies, is that I found out through a friend of a friend that there was some producer in Nicaragua that was an American person from Paramount who was trying to make a movie in Nicaragua. And so I like made it a point to get a hold of anyone who knew someone who knew someone who knew him, to get in front of him and say, like, please hire me. I know I've never made a movie before, but I promise you that I'll be like the best producer I can be and help you make this movie. And to make the long story short, I mean, eventually I got to him and he was like, I'll let you be a PA on the movie. I'm not going to let you produce the movie. But we made the movie for 5 years. And after 5 years, I was a producer on the movie.
And, you know, I think that's such a, like, you're speaking to such a good point where it's like the road to breaking in can be very easy for some people. Yeah. Other people, if you're just like, it's like, well, what pays my bills now?
Yeah.
And you can sort of also, but then the thing about, because it costs money to break into Hollywood, break into LA, sometimes the trap of that is then you get stuck in your own resume.
You do. You do. People would be like, well, I can offer you, why don't you come book this, like, you know, Carson Daly's show and you'll make, you know, $150,000 a year. And you're like, well, that sounds nice. You know, like I'm a poor girl who lived in a garage with my mom. Like that sounds great to me. And then what you don't realize is like, you're never going to have time to write. Like that show is going to be soul sucking and you're going to have to do everything that you have to do. Like, shit, I would be in a better place to go be a barista and make my own schedule and like have time to write. But like when you have grown up more poor, I think it's harder to think long term like that, because you get caught up in your own, like, well, what if I never have a job again, or if I don't have a job for a while? And that can be, that's something that like a lot of my white friends didn't have to deal with, right? Like they just knew that somehow they would survive and their family would help them. And I was like, well, my family's not like my immediate family is like not super well off. So how can I put my, how can I put my shit on them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's hard to like take those sort of like riskier jobs, cause you're already thinking like, okay, but how am I paying next month's rent? And am I going to have a job in 3 months? Is my rent going to be paid in a year? Like it's hard to pass up jobs where they're like, here's a job, salary, benefits, like vacation time. Like,
but you know what freed me of that was having, as an adult. So after I got divorced, a lot of like in the divorce, sort of some of my assets were frozen, and I wasn't speaking to my parents at the time, and I couldn't find a job. We were like in the recession, and I went to, I didn't have a place to live. Like I literally was like, oh, I'm going to sleep on the street tonight. And eventually got a hold of a friend who was like, you're not sleeping on the fucking street. Like, come stay on my couch. And I stayed on her couch for 2 months, I think. And like literally sometimes like all I had to eat was, there was this pizza place downstairs like for $5. Like, but for 2 hours you could get like unlimited pizza and drinks for $5. And like there were days that that's all I would eat. And after you go through that experience as an adult, you're like, oh, I survived this. Like, I can move to Los Angeles and, you know, I won't be so cold. And, like, I should just pursue that dream that I always wanted to pursue, because, like, if this is as bad as it gets, like, I'm okay, you know? If you have friends and family, like, you'll be okay. And eventually, like, I got a job as a bartender and I got to pay my friend, and you know, you just get back on your feet again and you find your resilience.
Like, what brought you to LA, and like, did you have a plan? Did you know what you wanted to do out here?
Oh my God, I had no plan, but what brought me to LA was that I made this movie in Nicaragua called Drunk Wedding, which is like not a great movie, but I still love it. I think that there are really funny, wonderful, redeeming parts of it. I know not everybody feels that way. But when that movie was sort of over, I was like, oh, I can make movies, you know? And so I came to Los Angeles thinking, like, I'll give myself 6 months, which is like the dumbest thing you can say because nothing takes 6 months. I lived on a friend's couch. That friend ended up moving to New York, and I just took over her lease, which is great because I wouldn't have qualified for an apartment anywhere else. And a friend loaned me her car because she had an extra car. And so I started doing like what I knew in New York, which was like talent booking. So I talent booked for the Eric Andre show, for like a bunch of, for Spike TV. I don't know if you remember them, but just like for E, like I just had a bunch of random jobs, and like that kept me afloat. And I really started taking my writing seriously, and I like took a bunch of classes. I wrote like my first few terrible screenplays. Like I wrote a very terrible like novel, but was like happy, you know, finally getting to do that and figure that out and learn my craft, and got into a bunch of writers groups and got terrible advice, got great advice. And, you know, but now sort of felt like, okay, now I'm doing it. But more and more this like movie thing was like gnawing at me, probably because I was writing a lot more, and people were starting to hear about Drunk Wedding and that I had made this movie for like an impossible budget. And so people that I didn't know started finding me. And they would say, hey, I heard that you somehow made this like comedy for no money. Like, can you come talk to us about it? I didn't even have movie magic, right? Like I had made that movie on an Excel. And, but you know, it was like trying to fake it till I make it. And people would start hiring me to do production. So I started doing sort of both, talent booking, production, and then writing at night. And I started producing commercials and short films, and that led to like other independent films. Like Matthew Lillard was producing his directorial debut, asked me to come produce that. And just before I knew it, I was like I produced The Gallows, which was a Blumhouse movie that Warner Brothers bought, that I made for $350,000, which made $42 million. And that was great, except like I wasn't participating on the back end on any of those things. So like people were making all this money off of this stuff that I was really like breaking my back making. But that's because, you know, I didn't know I was a business. And I think a lot of times, like a lot of writer producers, when they start, they don't realize that you are a business.
And, you know, when was like the turning point where you were like, oh, I'm committing? Because, you know, you're writing, you're doing it when you can, you have the day job. So when was the turning point where it's like, this is something I'm going to like fully commit to? This is like, did you know what you were going to do?
So I made the short film Whiplash with Damien Chazelle. And Damien was like 27, you know, or, I mean, at the time, I think he was like 24. And like, I just couldn't believe, and Damien's great and he's wonderful and he deserves every single accolade. But I couldn't believe that like this guy who had like made one sort of like school movie was having all of this support from all these people that like believed in, and they really believed in him, you know, and his script was phenomenal. So like, you can't deny that. But I had never like, it dawned on me that like he had so much belief in himself, and like the way that he talked about his project with such passion, that I was like, I don't advocate for myself that way. Like there's not a piece of, people ask me like, what are you writing? And I'm like, oh, it's not that good, you know, just like working on this thing that I've been working on for, you know, 5 years. And you sort of like downplay all of that. And I don't know if it's because I was like a woman in this like very patriarchal society, and you sort of like play that down, or because I was an immigrant and I didn't know if I like deserved certain things, you know. But that, like, I was like, I need to get myself some white guy confidence, you know what I mean? Like, I need to walk into a room like that. And that's when, after I made that movie for $25,000, the Whiplash short, and it went to Sundance, and you know, they gave me a pass at Sundance or whatever, but like I realized I made the movie and I wasn't on any of those panels. Like I made the movie and I wasn't in any of those press write-ups. And I just thought like that is only going to change when I start advocating for myself. And so right then, after I made that movie, I was like, okay, I have things that I'm passionate about, and I am no longer going to work for X amount of dollars. Like I literally sat down and was like, I made this company $42 million. Like I am worth something, and I'm no longer going to accept anything less than this. And I really stuck to it, and I started turning down work, and that got me into like a whole different mindset. And I started getting offered better jobs because people are like, oh, she doesn't work for that amount of money. And so I really became a producer, and I started to own it, and I made like bigger and better films, and I started getting paid more and more, and UTA asked to represent me, and suddenly it was like, oh, okay. But then I found that the better I was as a producer, the less people wanted to take me seriously as a writer. And it was really frustrating because like I placed in the top 10% of the Nichols. Like I had, been a finalist in all these contests, and like I couldn't get anyone to read me. And people were like, oh, I just don't want to make it weird, because I want to make a movie with you. And it just, Hollywood, especially pre-Harvey Weinstein, was so like, pre the demise of Harvey Weinstein, I think, was so like, this is your bucket and this is where you are, and you should be grateful that you're like one of the only Latina producers that's like making real money out there, and this is where you fit. And I was like, well, I don't like to fit in that box. And that was when, really probably around 2013, I really started to do it, and I got into the Fox Writers program. And that was when I was finally like, okay, you need to like own that you're a writer. And I thought that was going to be like my big break, and it was not at all. I was very distracted. I think my sister was like going through her transition, and I, was sort of like living that. And then also I got pregnant, and my daughter had this like terrible heart condition, and I was like, all right, well, I just need to like make money and focus on my family for a little bit. But it was very disappointing.
Yeah, and I'm curious about like, being a Latina producer. What are the things that come across your desk? What are some challenges you see in like producing like Latinx films?
Well, I didn't get to produce a lot of Latinx films, like people, that's one of the things I get criticized for a lot. I think especially like, I never realized how many people like don't like you until you open up your Twitter DMs, And a lot of people are like, oh, you make all these white people movies. And I'm like, well, I was just trying to work. And I was one of like the few Latina line producers that was like repped and making good money, so much so that I became like an executive producer, and like I wouldn't accept a title less than that. And yet I was making all of these like non-Latino films. And it's really because like the market wasn't buying them, and I wanted to make money. So I had to make other people's movies. And that was hard because when you're the only woman in the room, and sometimes like the only brown person in the room, I think people feel like they can say things that they wouldn't normally say. And, I've had so many casting conversations where people are like, Latins are hot right now. Like, let's put a Latin in there. Like, is there a Latin that you like, Gabby? I'm like, like if they're all the same, then just like pick one, And so it was like a very eye-opening experience, I think. Like, yes, I was excited to be in the room where it happened and like talk about things that, budgets and casting and like, what kind of distribution plan we're going to go with, and like have all these like great conversations at a higher level. But also you got to see, I think, some of the worst in some people. And that was eye-opening and like made me realize, oh no, like we need a lot more Latino content, and we need more representation, because like you really can't be what you don't see, you know?
It's tricky being like one of a few, and then a lot of the responsibility falls on you, but you are just working against this larger system.
Totally.
So I am curious of like what do you see are like some of the challenges of that? Some of the like structural stuff, some of the like things that people just aren't perceptive to, like, or just like a general thought of like Latinx content.
Some of that we've talked about, right? Like it's hard to ask all the Latinos to come in at a certain level, you know, like you can't judge us against like the white dudes that have had 30 years of experience because the doors were open to them sooner just because you got in and you were fine, you know? I think we have to like cast a wider net and accept that other people's like experiences are valid, even if they are not in the traditional medium that we ask them to be. So I think if you want a more inclusive and diverse like room, like writer's room, you have to be open to people's experience that is not directly the way that you came in. So that's sort of one thing. And then the other thing that's tough in these rooms is I think, and I really truly believe like the post Harvey Weinstein era is so wonderful for so many reasons, but you know, before that, like you had to not be too sensitive. Like people would write that on job postings, like, and they would tell you that in the interview, like you better have a thick skin, you can't be too sensitive. And now it's like I feel, I don't know if it's because I'm in a very inclusive writer's room right now, but the conversation has really shifted, not to like, oh, you can't be sensitive, but more like how can we be inclusive and true to a diverse voice. And that even 2 years ago was not the case. I mean, I have had some really, really racist conversations with people where you're like, I can't even believe that you said that, but if I say something to you, I might lose my job. So it's nice that the conversation is really changing, and I feel it, I see it, even in the types of material that people are reading and asking for. So I'm excited. I think we have a long way to go, but when you've been on the other side, I understand the frustration of like younger kids who are like, we shouldn't accept, like, this is not good enough. I get that, that's valid. But for somebody who has been so on the other side of that, where people have said to my face, like, well, you're not like those Latinos, like you're one of the good ones, you know? It is really incredible to see the growth.
So let's talk about you getting staffed on a show and writing for TV. Like, how did that happen?
Oh my God, it's such a, this sounds so corny, but it really was like such a dream come true, right? Because got into the Fox Writers program, like was like, yes, finally people are going to see me as a writer. I got like reps out of APA. I was like, yes, this is like, I'm on my way. And then I didn't get staffed, and my kid had a heart condition, and my sister was transitioning into like herself, and like my head was spinning, like I couldn't deal with it. Went to be like a producer for a few more years and was like, okay, I missed my shot. Like I didn't get in, and like now this is my life. And I got remarried to like a kid that I knew from Nicaragua who could not be more different than me, like grew up in the society like that I was not a part of. And he really had said to me, like, this is the thing that you've wanted your whole life. Like, why would you give this up? And I thought, well, because I'm the provider of our family, like I make more money and I have to like own that, you know, and sort of like, this is my life now. And he was like, well, I think you should, you know, just give it one more shot. And if it doesn't work out, then you can say you tried. So I applied to the Disney Writers Program, and I got in. And I realized at that moment, like, I have to save up to be able to afford to do this program. I had just bought a house. I had just like paid off like a bunch of debt, and I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to do this. And like, we really did budget, and thank God we did, because then the pandemic happened and all this stuff. But I got into the Disney Writers Program, and they introduced me to execs at ABC, and I said to them, like, there's only one show I want to write on. I want to write on A Million Little Things. Like, just get me in the room with the showrunner, with DJ Nash, and I promise you, like, I will get hired. Please just get me in the room. And it took a while to, like, get them to agree to give me that meeting. I think they were like, oh, it's not really Latino. Like, what, how does your experience contribute? And DJ and I had like an hour and a half conversation, and at the end of that, you know, he was like, come work with us. But I needed somebody to open that door, and like I couldn't open it by myself. Like there was nobody that I knew that could introduce me to him other than them, you know. But it goes back to the systemic, like I could afford to be in the program. There are people who can't afford to be in the program, and so they get shut out of those opportunities too.
I am curious of like why that was a show that you like had to work on.
So funny, you know, on the feature side, which we haven't really talked about, but I wrote this really raunchy, like Latino comedy about these two undocumented girls who are kind of like Elle Woods, but Latina. They don't speak Spanish, and they get deported to Mexico, even though they're from Colombia. And they end up becoming like the FBI's like only hope to save the world. And it's this like really fun comedy. And so I sort of then started getting asked, that got optioned over at the indie arm of Imagine, which is a company owned by Sanjay Sharma. And so for a while I thought I was going to be on that like comedy track. And I'd written like a bunch of comedy specs, and I had like a lot of my material was in comedy. But I started watching, just to prep for Disney, A Million Little Things. Like I started watching all the shows on ABC, and I did not like the pilot. And I was like, well, it's gotta get better, right? And before I knew it, I was like a season in. Like I totally bought in. I really liked it. It was like an American novela that I had grown up with. And I like, before I knew it, it reminded me of like eating with my abuelita and like talking about like what was happening. Like it was so dramatic, but funny. Like it has all these like great comedy. And I was just like hooked and addicted. And I was like, I want to work on a show that can, if it can speak to like a formerly undocumented, like poor Latina kid, then it's definitely speaking to a lot of other people. And so I really wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah. And so like, what was it like, is it like to be like working on a show you're a fan of and like sort of like living a dream that you for so long did not think was going to be in the cards for you?
Oh my gosh. The day before I started working, my boss called me and I just started crying. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm just so vulnerable because it's something I've wanted for so long. And like, I would get meetings with showrunners and they would, in the meeting, pitch me their movie. And it was so frustrating because it was like, oh, you didn't even read my material. Like, we're not here for me to get staffed on your show. We're here for me to tell you how you can get your movie made. It was really frustrating and hard. And like, my boss did none of that. Like, he wanted to know about my experience as a writer and what made me like a good writer for his show. And so he called me the day before and he was like, how do you feel? And I was like, I'm a puddle of tears because I'm so happy. I can't believe it. It's a lot harder than we tell people that it is. So like, so yes, it is a lot of sitting around and talking and all of that is wonderful and therapy and all of these things. But, there are very real deadlines, and working collaboratively with people whose ideas may be very different from yours, but are just as valid as yours, is such a like mind fuck in the best way. Like I love it. I couldn't have imagined that it would be this challenging and this great. You know, like I love going to work every day, even though it's in front of my computer right now.
Yeah.
But it's great. You're solving a puzzle every day. If you don't like puzzles, you should not be a writer.
And yeah, so let's talk about that, you know, like COVID. It's like interesting to see how like the conversation is of like getting production and even starting to like how like actors and all that stuff. But I'm curious of like, how are these like virtual writers' rooms working? Like, what's it like?
I would say at first a little awkward because you sort of don't know where to look, and you don't know how people are responding to your ideas. Like when you're next to somebody, you can feel their energy when you say something like funny or so it takes you a while to get your rhythm. But like we're a few months into it now. We're 3 months into it now, and we've really found our stride, and it feels like we're more efficient. And I know that it's hard, but at the same time, I am loving being home. That I like during lunch, I can empty the dishwasher, hang out with my kids, like walk my dog, and then come back to work. So I do hope that in the future we do have some sort of hybrid situation for parents, because there are some benefits. Other parts of it are it is difficult to connect with somebody when you're just seeing them on your screen and not feeling the energy, especially because we talk about really deep things, like people's sexual assaults, like, problems they've had with their parents, like really meaningful, in-depth things. And sometimes you just want to like reach out even, and like be physically close to them, that they just opened up and shared something so vulnerable, and you can't do that. So it's an adjustment, but there are benefits. And I think like we keep talking about all the bad things, and as a parent of 2 kids, there are benefits too. And I think like we're just afraid to say them out loud.
I don't know. It's like work from home is like a bad word,
Yeah. And it's not like I'm so much more productive. Like I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I wake up at 4:45 every morning, and I write because I don't have time to do my own writing now that I'm in a room at any other time. And I like hop on the bike and work out. I make, sometimes I play a little bit of music, or I, will do something else for myself personally. And then I make breakfast for my family, and then they wake up and I get to have like a morning with them where I'm not rushing off to traffic. And then I can really like be present here for work. And I find that we're really efficient because there's not as much like goofing around, which also contributes to the banter in the room. So you are missing that piece, and that's true of production offices. Like when we're making a movie, a lot of it you find in the camaraderie of like the water cooler, and not having that, you have to find another way to make that real for you, especially in a writer's room.
So I am curious about like, working on a show, but also being a producer. Just like, what are your general thoughts of like what the new normal will look like for like production in the next like year?
So I made my own COVID plan for myself, because just having been like an indie producer, I like gathered 100 or so crew I'd worked with, and I was like, let's just have like a 4-hour Zoom where we talk about what are the things that we need to do to make things safe for us. And we came up with a manual that we, have distributed to people that have asked for it. Like I sent it to STX, I sent it to Blumhouse, like people that have asked for it, I've given it to them. And it's just like our years of experience as people who like physically make movies as to how we can keep things more safe. And the more we find out about the virus, like we update it. The truth is that I think we all need to realize that like everybody needs to wear a mask. Like this is stupid that we're even having this debate. And some people are not going to get vaccinated when this comes out. Like that's just the reality. So like, how can we keep it safe? We have to have a lot of wash stations, and people need to wash their hands often. Like crafty cannot be what it is. And we're just all going to have to adjust, even after the vaccine becomes available. So that's just our new reality. The crews that work together a lot, us, for example, we make a lot of under $10 million movies. We work with a lot of the same crew. Those people they don't want to hurt each other. They have a shorthand. Like, they are more likely to be respectful and follow the rules that you set in place. People who don't really know each other, there's a little bit more of a mistrust there. And I think that that's harder. So when people say to me, like, oh, Jurassic Park shut down on day one, I'm like, yeah, that's an enormous crew of people. You don't know, like, what people are doing after hours, and everybody's a little mistrusting. I get that. On Palm Springs, which is the movie I did with Andy Samberg, you know, we're a very tight-knit, small crew. Everybody knew everybody, you know, their families. Like, it's less likely that you're putting them in danger, I think.
There's more news of them getting shut down by like SAG or something. How realistic, like, do you have like a timeline of when like films and maybe television will like start up again? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, I mean, television is I think that people that are working in states that have been better at controlling the pandemic, like New York, you know, it's trying to bounce back. Vancouver, which is where like a lot of our shows shoot over there, they've been better at controlling the pandemic. So I think there's like a better expectation that these people that have been working together for many years, if you're a returning show in a place that is doing a better job, it's more likely that you'll have more episodes, right? Mm-hmm. That feels true. I think for movies, it's hard if you're in a state like Florida, Los Angeles, where we're not doing as good of a job controlling the pandemic. It's harder to see that things will go back to normal in the fall. I mean, I think the smaller movies will benefit from a smaller crew and having less people to worry about, and they'll get made and bought. But I think like the bigger studio movies have a problem.
Who knows? Maybe we'll have like an indie resurgence because it's like they be made.
That would be great.
I'm always curious about my guests and the type of writing that they do. So like sometimes as writers, we tell the same story over and over. There's like themes we like to write about. So what are the stories that you're passionate about, that you're attracted to?
I find I write a lot about people who have some sort of loss that they're trying to mitigate. So I wrote a movie, Pixie, which is very much based on my life, about trying to sort of find my father and like, what does that mean for me? But through the lens of like a 15-year-old, you know, who's sort of like, who has been lying to herself her whole life, telling herself that Antonio Banderas is her dad. So she goes on this like search for him. So I find I write a lot about somebody like trying to fix like a missing appendage in some way. And sort of coming to some realization about that, whether it's that they really need that appendage or that they really don't need that appendage. So that's pretty true. And then I do have a lot of comedy in my repertoire, but I find that the dramedy space is really like more where I live, because I think that that's more life. Like, there's things that are horrible, but if you can navigate the comedy of it, you know, you'll learn and grow and ultimately be more happy, I think.
Can you like sort of shout out some of the films you've produced that people should check out? Just support a badass Latina producer. Be like, I know her.
And some of them are white, you guys. But just know that there are a lot of like casting conversations and like things that got to happen that maybe wouldn't have happened. But I made a movie called The Fuck It List, which I really loved, and is sort of like about white privilege, but is about this, you know, kid sort of navigating where they're going to go to school, and it's a little bit of like a Ferris Bueller's Day Off type movie, which I really enjoyed. It was written by Michael Duggan and Dan McDermott. Love that movie. It's available on Netflix. Made a movie called Palm Springs with Andy Samberg, which we made for $4 million. And it sold for 17, so we're really excited about that, and it's available on Hulu right now. Made a movie called The Starling, which was directed by Ted Melfi, who directed Hidden Figures. And it stars Melissa McCarthy and Daveed Diggs from Hamilton, Kevin Kline, Chris O'Dowd. And it is about loss and grief. And you'll see Melissa McCarthy sort of in a way, hopefully haven't seen her before. That'll come out soon. I made a movie called Gully, which was directed by Nabil Elderkin, who's a music video director. His directorial debut, which has like Charlie Plummer and Jacob Lattimore, Amber Heard, Terrence Howard. It's really fun, sort of look into the dark underbelly of poverty on the east side of Los Angeles and sort of how people navigate that. So you'll be able to see that soon. The Gallows is a horror movie that I made, which was got sold to Warner Brothers. You can find that on Amazon. Oh my gosh, I did a movie, Burden, which is on Amazon with Forrest Whitaker, Garrett Hedlund, which is about a guy that left the KKK. There's a lot of them, you guys. Go on my IMDb. You'll see some really fun ones and some not so good ones, for sure.
I am always curious of like who my guests are fans of. So who are the writers that are heroes of yours, peers, friends? I always frame it like people you creep on Instagram and like they don't know who you are, but you love their work. So who are some of those writers for you?
Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with Tanya Saracho. I think that like Vida is everything. Vida is like, oh, it's just so good. And there's such great acting and writing there. And I just love it. And so I'm a big fan of her. Was really excited about Gentefied, so I'm really starting to read more of like Marvin Lemus's scripts and like really think that he's wonderful. Daylin Rodriguez, I think, does really great work. You know, she does Queen of the South. I'm loving Moises Zamora, who, you know, created Selena. I'm a really big fan of his. I think I really like Aaron Serna's writing too. I think that he's somebody who, you know, everybody should look at. You know, obviously like Phoebe Waller-Bridge, I think is incredible. And like, if you don't know her, you're really missing out, you know? And then the more like romantic side of me, like really likes Julie Plack. And I think like I like all of her work as something that's like a guilty pleasure. I was really into Sarah Gamble's show, You, which is based on a book, obviously. And that was like nice and creepy. My stepdad was really into it too, which was weird, but we bonded over that. I'm so interested in like the moment that we're having right now. And I see like how much the African American community like does such a good job of rallying behind each other and sort of like not expecting less of each other and demanding more and sort of saying like, this is what I'm worth. And I think with us Latinos, sometimes it's a little harder because we don't have as much shared history, because like you're Mexican, like your experience of being a Latino is like through that lens. And it's a lot different for me as a person who was born in Nicaragua, you know? And I think it's different from somebody who's Argentine. It's different from somebody who's a Spaniard. It's different from somebody who like is in Uruguay. And so there's a lot of things that unite our culture. And then there's a lot of things that are different. And sometimes we don't feel like one thing. And so it's a little harder for us to rally behind all of each other the same way I think that Black people are so good at doing. And I'd love to see more of that. Like, there's got to be a way that our community can be more united in their Latino-ness. And I hope that we all try to find that. And some of that is just a function of, like, not seeing ourselves on TV. Like, it can't be that One Day at a Time is, like, the only Latino show on TV, which is a wonderful show, and I love it. And Gloria deserves every accolade that she gets, and so does Mike Royce. But that can't be the only one, and I think they would be the first to say that too. So the more we see other Latino families and other kinds of Latinos on TV, the more I think we'll be able to feel more united as a culture.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sort of curious to like, as a producer, what are things that you look for? Like how, like, is it like the script? What is it that you're like, these are all the points that it's hitting for me that I am confident about?
That answer has changed a lot for me. Like at the beginning, it was like, I'll make any movie, even if I don't like it. Like I'll make any movie to get credits, to move ahead, to meet people. And I think that was like the right attitude at the time because I didn't have any connections, and that's how I got to meet people. But now that I'm like a lot more selective, maybe because I have kids and me making a movie or making TV or anything is like time away from them. But so now I'm like, I have to be telling a story that I'm proud to tell. And it has to be something that I stand by. It's got to be a place where like I have a voice. Like if I don't have a voice in the other decisions that we make, that's not just the writing. I mean, I can't be a part of that. So it has to be a place where I have a real seat at the table, a place that pays me for my time. Like that's for me the biggest thing that I think Latinos, we need to like learn our worth. And so many times like I never advocated for myself, never negotiated for myself, and when I started to do that and I thought it would turn people away, it actually made me more desirable to the people that were trying to hire me. So I think teaching ourselves that is really important. So yeah, I have to have a seat at the table. I have to be able to negotiate what I need. And I have to have the flexibility to be with my family. So like, I think if I can meet those things and we're telling a story that I'm passionate about because it has to be worth it to leave my family, then that's exciting to me. If they just want me because they want a Latino name on whatever thing they're doing, then they can go hire somebody else.
So this is a social media plug part. So where can people find you? What's your handle?
My website is GabieRevillaLugo.com, and I have like short stories on there and scripts and things like that. And then my Twitter is at GabieRevLugo. My Instagram is private.
That's fine.
But you can try to friend me and see how I'm feeling. It's Gabby R. Lugo, and I'm with two B's, Gabby with two B's. So at Gabby Rev Lugo on Twitter, I will talk your ear off more than you want.
When I hear people that are very like active on Twitter, what sort of like do you feel like is the benefit as a writer to like be like a quote unquote personality on there?
I really love like connecting with other writers. I think it's nice to see that even at all the different levels, like we're going through a lot of the same things. It's nice to know that even like Javi, Grio Marx, or like Jose Molina, like people who are really established writers still have like anxiety about pitching in the same way that you do. It's nice to celebrate their triumphs too, you know, like Aaron Serna had a pilot in development. Like I'm so excited for him, you know, and excited for us to get to see some of their work. And so it makes you feel like a sense of community, especially during the pandemic. And I think I also just feel like I'm losing my mind with this administration a lot. And so it's nice to have camaraderie and that other people feel like it's crazy as well, and that you're not the only one that's like, how can this all be happening? So please vote.
And my last question is, I have my guest title the episode.
Oh.
So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. In that blank, you can put more than one word. You can mix them all around. Just whatever feels true to you, your writing, this conversation. I also use it as a recruitment tool. So if someone sees the title, they can be like, that's like me. And that'll incentivize them to listen.
I am a Nicaraguan American dramedy mom who likes the occasional dick joke.
Perfect. That's going to be an interesting graphic. But
Maybe we won't say the dick joke part.
Put in parentheses.